Welcome to my series, Shit That Happened When I Was a 911 Dispatcher, and this is my second most memorable call I ever took. My opinion, you have to have a little dark humor to be a dispatcher because, unhealthy coping skills. So I might laugh throughout this story because, in my opinion, this is a funny one because I know that the kid survived. This call would have been 2004, 2005-ish. It was a Saturday night. It was sometime around midnight, and I remember that because it's a part of the story. And the city I worked for, you answered the phone, 911, what's the address of your emergency? So I answer the phone, and we had a CAD map system where if you had an open line for long enough, it would start to narrow in little by little on where the call was coming from. But this call was showing to be outside of the city limits. So the way, at least back then, the way that it worked was agencies had neighboring agencies that their calls would roll over to in the event of high call volume, power outage, everybody and their moms calling, right? So for example, if I lived in A town and something was popping off on the highway and 400 people were calling 911 at the same time, then B town next door might be my rollover agency, so they're going to get the rollover calls that our phone lines can't handle. So this was a rollover call from the county, from the sheriff's office, and I dispatched for a municipality. So remember, this was a different time. Back then, addresses had to be validated manually, maps had to be updated manually, and so I couldn't tell where this kid was. So the call comes in. This kid is crying, a little upset, not hysterical at all. I say kid, teenager. And he essentially tells me that he is stuck in his windshield and he doesn't know where he is. I'm like, what do you mean you're stuck in your windshield? He says, I got into a wreck, I went through the windshield, and my parents are gonna kill me. Well, the volume on this call, or like the sound quality on this call, not the best, but I can definitely hear what he's saying, and he's not having a problem hearing me either. I confirm with him, you went through the windshield, and he says yes. Finding out where he was and what his injuries were the most important. I start going through triaging of how to find out where he is, right? I say, okay, well, what road are you on? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, what's the closest town that you were in? And he tells me, and I'm like, okay, well, at least I know it's not some crazy fluke where he got the completely wrong agency. And so I say, well, where were you on your way to? And he's like, I was going home. Okay, well, where's home? I'm not going to tell you. I'm like, okay, well, where were you coming from? Well, I'm not going to tell you that either. And in between every question I'm asking him, he just continues to tell me how his parents are going to kill him and I cannot call his parents. And I'm being a little dramatic right now, but ultimately this conversation happened very quickly. And when I realized that he was not going to give me any information, I had one of my coworkers start working on tracing the phone number, getting the billing address, and trying to contact someone at that address. Why didn't he want to tell me where his home was, or why did he keep telling me that I couldn't call his parents because they were going to kill him? Because this 17-year-old kid lied to his parents about where he was going to be for the night. His curfew was midnight, and if he was not home at curfew, he said his mama did not play and she was going to kill him. And he went out and went drinking. Tried to assure him that his parents were just going to be happy that he was okay and he was alive, and if he could just please tell me what friend's house he had been at and what his home address was, I could try to map out the way that he would have been driving to go home so that we could find him, and he just would not do it. Sweetest kid, very polite, but he was like, ma'am, you don't understand. Now keep in mind, he wasn't truly fearful. There was a hint of humor in his voice, so I knew he wasn't returning to a abusive situation or anything like that. Well, I'm keeping the line open because back then, this was 20 years ago, you could only reassess for an updated location once every 60 seconds. So you had to keep the phone line open for 60 seconds, and you could then, I forget the word, but it was reconfigurate on your screen, and it would narrow in a little closer each time. So there's probably a 5 to 7 minute window where my coworkers are doing the legwork and I'm just keeping him on the call, right? And at this point, we have established that he is not bleeding profusely. He does not have any what he doesn't think to be life-threatening injuries. He's not having trouble breathing. He is keeping a clear and consistent conversation with me. And so we just kind of start making small talk. This kid was telling me knock-knock jokes. He was asking me what I looked like. He was asking me what my favorite movie was. I was doing anything I could to keep this kid talking to me so I could keep the line open. He was hilarious. We have confirmed at this point of the call that he literally is through the windshield. He went through the windshield and he is stuck in the windshield. And how is he calling me? Kids, this was when Bluetooth just came out. And his fancy ass car that his parents bought him and made him abide by very strict rules to keep that car had Bluetooth. We finally narrowed down the path that he probably would have driven. We closed the channel down and we literally played hot and cold with the officers. Mind you, our officers were not super familiar with this area because this was a county call and they were busy and it rolled over to us. So my officers, who also are not very familiar with the area, with a kid who's like refusing to tell him where he is we have the channel closed. I have the kid on the phone and we have officers driving around and they're blaring their sirens. And I'm telling them whether they're getting hotter or colder until they finally found the kid. And I could not hang the phone up. It was so entertaining at this point. This kid was hilarious. And he just kept begging the officers and the paramedics to please let him move in with them and to adopt them because his mom and dad were going to kill him, take away his video games, take away his cell phone, take away his car, and he was going to be grounded for the rest of his life. The kid was fine. The kid had to get stitches in his head, and that was it. The officers stayed at the hospital until the parents showed up, and they said it was hilarious. Like, the parents were stern and strict, but also had an amazing sense of humor, just like the kid did, and it was so funny. As an added bonus, the parents made him write an essay to every person involved, dispatcher, police, paramedics, nurses, doctors at the hospital. He had to write an essay to all of us apologizing.